Hi, I'm Victor, and welcome to Terminal Tuesday. This is a little bit of a different format than the videos I've recorded in the past, but I think it'll be a little fun. The idea here of Terminal Tuesday is really just to have some quick, short talks about things you might do in the terminal. So this might include, little tips and tricks in the Bash shell, or little quick things you do. So today we're going to focus on GitHub forks, and specifically we're actually going to talk about syncing a GitHub fork. This is a really common issue that I've had students come across, where you fork an original repo and you have your own fork that you start working on, and then the original repo actually adds something that's actually kind of interesting, and you kind of want to incorporate that back into your own repo, that forked repo. So sometimes people feel like they have to just start over, that they have to essentially try to do some hacky way to try to get this extra information, or just ignore it. Turns out it's actually not that bad of an idea, and it helps a little bit to understand how forks work. And once you realize a fork really is just a repo, and that we can sync our forks just like how we would merge branches, is actually not that scary of a concept. So let's kind of talk a little bit first about what a fork really is. So this is a classic example of having a repo represented abstractly. And so you can see at the very beginning right here, is kind of like the history, the start of the repo, and each of these dots represent a new commit, being the past at the bottom and then the more recent to the top. And so the idea here is that if you ignore this little line here, which will represent a new branch, this represents really the progression of making a new ideas, or I should say new commits on your repo. So each dot again representing a new commit. And so sometimes what we'll do is we'll start a repo, and then we have this kind of branching off point where we want to say we're going to continue off this main branch, this default branch here, used to be called the master branch, but we also kind of want to try out this new experiment, or we have this idea that we want to try out, but we don't want to make it the main part of the branch. And there's reasons why you might want to do this, like for example, production. You might not want to modify the main branch that other people are looking at, or that is actually being the thing that is being deployed out to everyone else. So you want to kind of play this little experiment. So we branch off, and this becomes kind of like our last common commit, or you almost think of it like our last common ancestor. And essentially we can branch off into this new branch and create a new parallel history. Usually you'll hear people talk about this as parallel universes. And that's the idea of a branch here, or a repo, and our branching. And so if you think about this for a second, this is going to be very similar to when we talk about a fork, in the sense that we had a common history right here, and we branched off to create a new kind of history. But a fork actually comes into a more powerful tool, because what we'll actually do is create a new set of branches in history. Essentially, it's a new repo. And I should reiterate that a GitHub fork actually is not specific to Git. It's actually a GitHub thing, but it really helps with collaboration. So when we fork, what this really looks like is we have this original repo with all its history and all its branches, and we create a fork, which is kind of like a copy of this repo. And now we have our own forked repo. And so again, kind of reiterating, why would you actually fork on this thing versus cloning it? Is that essentially when you clone it, you basically are saying this actual repo here, and then kind of when you do a git clone, it kind of keeps permissions of who's supposed to write to which repo and stuff like that. And you can do certain things push it to your own. But GitHub makes this things if you're going to copy this repo, it's nice to have a little reference to where this original repo goes through. So you actually see when you do a fork on GitHub, you'll see that there's a reference on the web page to the original the original repo that you forked from. And so it's kind of nice to have this little connection in here. And what's really nice about it is that now we have all the branches that were included in that repo. Now, again, this is where a repo can be really nice. A forked repo, you can start doing your own thing. In fact, if you do a git clone, it probably wouldn't matter too much if you did a forked repo. But having that connection there is super powerful, because what can sometimes happen is a forked or original repo actually has a new hit commit while you've been working on your own forked repo. And now there's a difference between these two. And maybe, for example, this new commit is something you actually want to incorporate into your own repo. And this is actually kind of a little frustrating because you're like, well, like I have this other commits in here. Do I just copy the code from here into here? And sometimes you can do that because it's just a simple some line changes in a file. But other times a single commit can actually mean those huge changes. And so you might actually want to try to incorporate that directly versus trying to re-implement it. And plus, again, you get to keep all the history of what's going on. So I have one commit here, but it could be many commits, or maybe it's on different branches too, and you want to incorporate that into your forked repo. So again, this is actually possible with a forked repo. It's called syncing. And so we're actually going to go through that a little bit. I'm going to demonstrate syncing. I also have an article I wrote about this that maybe, if you're like reading a little bit better or kind of seeing the code written out, I have that linked into the description. But we'll go over this now into how we can sync our repos. All right, let's get into an example. So we're just going to simply fork a repo, and then we're going to add some commits to it. And then while we're adding some commits, there's going to be a new commit added to this new original repo, and we'll try to incorporate that those results or those changes, say those commits, right? So let's start with an actual repo here. So I have an example repo here. We can see we have 3 commits. And there's only one branch here, but if there were multiple branches, when we fork this, we'd actually see multiple branches be included. So let's go and click fork, and I'm just going to use my profile, but you won't have to worry about that. I just have kind of multiple files for my GitHub, and we'll just let this take a second. And while it's taking a second, you can see now it's made a new repo. You can see it is under my profile here. It is my repo. It's the same name as the original right here, which is referenced here. And this again is why it's super useful in GitHub to have this reference, because now we can actually see, like if we wanted to go back to it, maybe do a pull request and all that stuff. And you can even see here is that here's the original repo, the actual user owner of that repo, and the branch of that repo, saying that it's matched up. So you can see a little bit how quickly we can do these kind of things. So let's go ahead and clone this right here. So I'll go clone this like normal, and let's go and pull up a terminal real quick. And so we're going to pull up our terminal, and remember this is cloning our forked repo, right? Not the original repo. And if I do this now, it's like, cool, let's go ahead and check out that repo. And let's just do a Git log. And you can see here, the author is me. And you can see here, all the commits are good. So good. So, and I usually do this little alias here just to make it a little easier. So we can see our commits. So let's go ahead and add actually our own commits. So we're just going to add a new file just because it makes life a little easier for us to do. No merge conflicts and all that stuff. And let's do a git add of new file, git commit, and that message with, let's say commit by Victor. Oops, spell my name right. Commit Victor. All right, cool. So now if you see our commits, you can see here's our new commit, right? And so you can see here everything, these 3 commits are actually from the original repo, and now we have our own commit. Now, while we're doing that, in the background, the original repo is going to have a new, interesting commit. So we're just going to have a new repo here, and so, or not new repo, new commit, and this is what I'm doing in the background, movie magic. So let's pull that up now. Okay, so let's go back to the original repo. So this is our repo here. We haven't pushed anything, so our commits won't show up. But let's go ahead and go back to that forked repo. Or sorry, the original repo. And you can see here, instead of having 3 commits, there's now 4 commits. In fact, it's called interesting commit. That's really what's changed here. So what we want to do, we want to incorporate this in here, but it's not going to match. So we can do this actually not that hard. So we're going to go back to our terminal. And what we're going to do, we're actually going to add a remote. So a remote-v, oops, yeah, spell it right, remote-v. It shows us our remotes that's already there. And let me just make this a little smaller. There we go. So you can see our remotes. That's our current repo. And what we want to do, we want to add a, we want to add our own remote that is the original repo. So we go git remote add upstream, and then the actual name of that upstream. So in this case, it's just the original repo. So I actually already copy and paste that into here. And you can see now if I do git remote -v, you can see that we now have this upstream. And this is basically our reference now to say, hey, like this is where the original repo comes from. So what we're going to do first, we're actually going to do a git fetch upstream. So what this is basically saying is like get the information from upstream, pull this down so we can reference it. So I'm going to pull that down. And there we go. So we've actually fetched in here. You can see this little information here. And now what we're going to do, if I do git log, or let's do git lg, just to see this. You can see here, there's our differences. This is right as my my forked repo, and this right here is from the upstream or the original repo. And what I want to do is actually combine this. I want to merge this into here. So I'm just going to do a simple git merge upstream / main. So what we're doing, we're saying merge this stuff into this main branch. And if I do this properly, we shouldn't hopefully have any conflicts. And just saying merging in here, that's our commit message. I'm just going to keep it the same. And now you can see merge made. Okay, so now if I do git log, you should see that, whoops, let's do git lg since we've been using git lg. You can see that we now have this new commit made in here. So we actually have our full history completely included now into our main branch. Pretty cool. So that's all it is to it. It really is 3 commands. The 3 commands really is just adding first the upstream. So the upstream meaning the original repo. And then we're just doing our fetch upstream, basically pulling in the history down into our local machine, and then doing a git merge, which is really like not too much different. The biggest things that we're doing a merge from this upstream / main. So essentially it's treating it like another branch. So that's all it is to it. It's a nice, easy thing to do. Really it's 3 lines. I do have an article written out. It will be linked below in the description. But thanks again for joining me, and hopefully we'll have another Terminal Tuesday sometime in the future. Thanks, and have fun coding.